It was a hot, oppressive New York summer in 2003. The streets of Queens were sweltering, the city's heat clinging to every surface long after the sun had set. The usual hum of the city, cars whizzing by, people walking briskly, the faint sound of chatter in the distance, felt heavier, almost suffocating. The heat seemed to press against every window, every corner of every building. It was a typical night in New York, but something extraordinary was about to unfold. 22-year-old Amanda Pierce had just finished her shift at a small hotel in Midtown Manhattan. She'd spent her evening greeting guests, taking calls, handling paperwork. Amanda was known for her bright smile, her infectious positivity. Everyone at the hotel liked her. At just 22, she had so much life ahead of her, so many dreams she hadn't yet realized. It was 9:30 p.m. when she clocked out, ready to head home. She left the hotel, her brown hair tied back in a neat ponytail, wearing her usual uniform. Simple, unassuming. A young woman blending into the New York crowd. As she stepped outside, the sound of the city was all around her. Cars honking, voices in the distance, the dull hum of the subway. She pulled out her silver Nokia phone and made a quick call to her mother. "I'm on my way home," she said. Those were the last words anyone would hear from her. Amanda was a part of the pulse of the city, a young woman just going about her life, thinking she was safe. But that night something changed. Amanda Pierce, in the middle of a bustling city, was about to vanish without a trace. Just like that. Gone. No one saw anything. No clues. No answers. The mystery of her disappearance would haunt her family and the entire city for 16 long years. Her family tried calling her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. They waited, hoping it was just a delay. But by the time midnight rolled around, that sinking feeling began to set in. Amanda was missing, and the silence was deafening. Her family didn't know what to do. They kept calling, praying for her to pick up, but it was too late. Amanda had already disappeared. What happened to Amanda Pierce that night? Was it a tragic accident, or something far darker? For 16 years, that question would remain unanswered. But what if I told you that the key to finding her was lying in a place no one ever thought to look? Before we dive deeper into the mystery of Amanda's disappearance and the shocking discovery that followed, I want to take a moment to thank all of my incredible subscribers. Your support is what keeps this channel growing, and I truly couldn't do it without you. If this story moves you, please take a second to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in the persistence of justice, even when it takes years to uncover the truth. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll be the first to know when the next gripping story drops. Amanda Pierce was the kind of person who lit up a room. Petite, with soft brown hair and a smile that could disarm anyone, she was the type of young woman who made an impression wherever she went. At just 22 years old, Amanda was full of life, with dreams bigger than the city she lived in. She worked as a front desk clerk at a small Midtown Manhattan hotel, where she was well loved by both her coworkers and the guests. Her excellent work ethic, mixed with a cheerful demeanor, made her an asset to the hotel. Every guest who came through those doors left with a positive impression of Amanda. She was always willing to help, always smiling, always giving her best. Amanda had a bright future ahead of her. She had been considering further studies, perhaps even a career in hospitality management. But beyond that, Amanda's true passion lay in helping others, in making people feel at ease, something she'd done so effortlessly her entire life. Her friends described her as kind, caring, and incredibly driven. A young woman who was always looking ahead, always thinking about what was next. But, like many young adults her age, she didn't quite know the danger that was lurking in the shadows. On July 18, 2003, Amanda finished her shift at the hotel around 9:30 p.m. It was just another summer night in New York City, the kind of evening where the air was thick with heat, and the streets buzzed with the usual chaos of people rushing to and fro. Amanda, as usual, tidied her desk, stacked her paperwork neatly, and hung up the off-duty sign. She stepped out into the streets of Midtown Manhattan, her brown hair pulled back into a tidy ponytail, her small black purse in hand, her white hotel uniform looking crisp in the evening light. But that was the last time anyone would see Amanda Pierce. It wasn't uncommon for her to be on the move, heading to the subway after work to make her way home. But what was strange was the fact that Amanda had always been punctual, always kept in touch. So when her mother received that phone call from her at 9:45 p.m., there was nothing unusual about it. "I'm on my way home," Amanda had said. Her mother, reassured by the brief conversation, hung up, unaware that those would be the last words she would hear from her daughter. It would be the last confirmation she'd get of Amanda's whereabouts. At 9:45 p.m., Amanda had made her way to Queensboro Plaza Station, just a few blocks away from her workplace. The station, often bustling with commuters, was the starting point for her nightly commute. But what Amanda didn't know as she descended the stairs and entered the crowded station was that she was walking into a trap set by someone who knew exactly where she was and what she would be doing that night. By the time 10:30 p.m. rolled around and Amanda hadn't returned home, her family began to worry. Amanda was always on time. Her absence felt wrong. Her mother called her cell phone, but there was no answer. Another call. Still no answer. A third call. Nothing. Panic began to set in. Something wasn't right. By midnight, after what felt like an eternity of unanswered calls, the Pierce family reached out to the police. They reported Amanda missing, detailing her last phone call to her mother, her usual route home, and the time she was expected to arrive. The NYPD responded quickly, launching a search in the area around Queensboro Plaza Station, canvassing the streets, speaking to witnesses. But the search led to nowhere. Amanda's phone had been switched off. There were no signs of struggle, no visible clues, nothing to indicate what had happened to her. The city's pulse continued as it always had, bustling, chaotic, and loud. But for Amanda's family, it was as though the world had gone silent. The night dragged on, and the search intensified, but still no one had seen Amanda leave the station. She seemed to have vanished into thin air, swallowed by the darkened streets of Queens, with no one the wiser. But what if Amanda hadn't just disappeared into the crowd, unnoticed as many had assumed? What if someone had been watching her? Someone who knew she'd be leaving at that exact time. Someone who had planned for this moment, knowing precisely what she would do, where she would be, and when. Was this a random act? Or was there someone closer to her than anyone had realized? A person who had been keeping an eye on her movements for weeks? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, as the investigation continued. Who was the man in the gray jacket? What role did he play in Amanda's disappearance? Was he just another stranger in the crowd, or was he someone who had been lurking, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? The chilling truth was just beginning to unravel, and the investigation was far from over. But for now, Amanda was missing, and the city of New York, along with her family, had no idea just how deep this mystery would go. While the NYPD worked tirelessly, there were whispers that maybe the key to finding Amanda wasn't in the city streets. Maybe it was buried somewhere else, somewhere they hadn't looked before. But no one could have predicted that a single unexpected discovery in Forest Park would change the course of the investigation forever. By midnight, when Amanda still hadn't returned home, her family's fear turned into overwhelming panic. The minutes stretched into hours, and as the clock ticked on, they felt every second, their hearts sinking with each unanswered call. Her mother, unable to do anything but pace the small apartment, dialed her daughter's phone repeatedly, but each time she was met with the harsh, unfeeling tone of the voicemail. Amanda's father, his worry mounting, called her friends, hoping someone had seen or heard from her. But each call led to the same silence. The streets of New York, vibrant and alive just hours before, felt eerily quiet in comparison to the storm brewing inside their hearts. By 1 a.m., it was clear. Something was terribly wrong. Amanda was gone, and the frantic calls had become a haunting silence. That's when they knew they had to act. Her family called the NYPD, and soon officers arrived at their apartment. The officers took notes, gathering the sparse details they had. A missing 22-year-old woman, last seen at 9:45 p.m. making a call to her mother before heading to the subway station. There were no signs of struggle, no indication of foul play. Just a young woman who had vanished. No body. No trail. No witnesses. The NYPD began their search around Queensboro Plaza Station. They scoured the area, checking nearby streets, questioning anyone who might have seen something, but the investigation led them nowhere. No one had seen anything unusual. No one knew where Amanda had gone. It felt like she had simply disappeared into thin air. The city was awake, alive, yet it seemed like Amanda had vanished into a black hole, swallowed by the endless flow of people and cars. As the hours passed, the initial wave of hope slowly began to recede. The search was slow, tedious, and without result. But just when it seemed like the case might stall, something changed. Investigators decided to review the security footage from Queensboro Plaza Station. The security footage was grainy, old, and the cameras were far from perfect. But in the blurry frames, there it was, Amanda. She was clearly visible, though the image was far from sharp. Amanda's unmistakable figure, her brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail, her petite frame standing out in the crowd. But it was what she was doing that caught the attention of the investigators. Amanda was not alone. A man was walking beside her. A man in a gray jacket, someone who had been with her after she left the hotel, someone who had walked with her through the crowded station and into the night. The image was too blurry to make out the man's face with any certainty, but it was enough to raise alarm bells. Could this man have been with Amanda the entire time? Could he have been the last person to see her alive? The implications were chilling. This wasn't just a random disappearance. This wasn't just a case of someone getting lost in the vast expanse of New York City. Amanda had been walking with a stranger, a man who might know more about her disappearance than anyone could have imagined. Everyone involved in the case knew this was important. For days, the investigation had felt like a blank canvas, with no leads to follow and no answers to find. But now they had a lead. They had this blurry image, a potential breakthrough. The question remained, who was the man in the gray jacket? Was he just a passerby? Someone she'd happened to walk past in the crowded station? Or was he someone who had been waiting for the right moment, someone who had been watching her? Was he just a random stranger? Or did he have a more personal connection to Amanda? Could he have been following her all along? Was he someone she knew, or had he been lurking in the shadows, waiting for his chance? It was the kind of question that would keep investigators up at night, staring at the footage, hoping for a clue, hoping for some answer to the mystery that had been unfolding in front of them. But there were no easy answers. All they had was a blurry image and the unsettling feeling that this man was somehow involved. This wasn't the random crime that they had initially feared. This was a case that was growing more complex by the second, and the truth was beginning to feel further away than ever. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think happened that night? Was the man in the gray jacket just a stranger, or was he someone who had been tracking Amanda for weeks? Was this a random act, or was there someone closer to Amanda who might have had something to do with her disappearance? Do you think this blurry image is the breakthrough we've been waiting for? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Who do you think this man was, and what do you think happened to Amanda that night? Was this a chance encounter, or was there something more sinister at play? We've got so many questions, and we're about to dive deeper into this story. So make sure to keep the comments coming, and let's see where this mystery takes us. But before we continue, I want to thank all of you who've already subscribed and shared your thoughts with us. Your support is what keeps this channel alive, and your input is truly appreciated. Now, let's continue with this investigation and see what happens next. This case is far from over, and every new clue brings us one step closer to finding out what really happened to Amanda Pierce. But remember, this case is not just about Amanda. It's about a family, a community, and the truth that's been hidden for so long. And one way or another, the truth will always come to light. 16 long years. That's how long Amanda's family waited. 16 years of empty hopes and unanswered questions. The years passed in silence, with only the faintest hope lingering. The candles lit every July in Amanda's memory, the tears shed every time the family spoke her name, the hope that one day, somehow, they would know what really happened to her. But for over a decade, the case remained cold. The investigation stalled, and the NYPD, once so committed to finding answers, had moved on to new cases, leaving Amanda's name to fade into the background. But in 2019, everything changed. Just when it seemed that time had erased all traces of Amanda, an unexpected discovery shifted the entire course of the investigation. It wasn't in some dark alley or an old warehouse, but rather in a place many had overlooked. Forest Park, a peaceful green area in Queens where people jogged, picnicked, and walked their dogs. For years, the park had been searched, scoured by volunteers, K-9 units, and police officers hoping to find anything that would bring closure to Amanda's family. But it was in the quiet of the park, among the trees and underbrush, that the breakthrough came. A construction crew was working on repairs to an old water pipeline when one of the workers, while digging into the soil, felt something unusual. His shovel hit something harder than the dirt beneath him. Thinking it was just a rock or debris, he brushed it aside, only to uncover what seemed like an old, rotted burlap sack. The worker's curiosity got the best of him, and as he carefully lifted the sack from the ground, the world around him seemed to slow down. There, in the midst of the leaves and dirt, he saw it. Inside the bag was a crumpled piece of clothing, stained with dark brown blood. The worker froze, realizing what he had just uncovered. He immediately called his supervisor, who then contacted the NYPD. Within minutes, police arrived at the scene, cordoning off the area and beginning to carefully examine the find. The bag was old, weathered by time and exposure, but the shirt inside was unmistakable. It was a white dress shirt, the very same uniform Amanda had been wearing on the night she disappeared. And on that shirt were unmistakable bloodstains. This wasn't just any old, discarded item. This was critical. This was the break in the case that Amanda's family had waited for all these years. At first, the discovery seemed too good to be true. Could this blood-stained shirt be the key they had been waiting for? Could it really be Amanda's? The forensic team was called in, and immediately they set to work. The bloodstains, though aged, were still visible. The shirt, although worn and tattered, carried the unmistakable signs of a struggle. The forensic experts knew that DNA testing could confirm if it was indeed Amanda's, but the stakes were incredibly high. This shirt wasn't just a piece of clothing, it was a vital piece of evidence, a tangible connection to the case that had slipped through their fingers for so long. The NYPD forensic team took the shirt back to their lab, where they began the meticulous process of analyzing the stains. Hours passed as the team carefully lifted traces of DNA from the fabric. The blood, while partially degraded after 16 years, was still intact enough for testing. The DNA samples extracted from the shirt were sent to the lab for analysis, and while the team waited for the results, a sense of cautious hope began to grow in the air. This shirt, found in a park that had been searched multiple times over the years, could finally give them the answer they had been looking for. And then the breakthrough came. The results came back from the lab, and they were nothing short of staggering. The DNA found on the shirt was, without a doubt, Amanda's. The confirmation was the first major piece of concrete evidence they had in over a decade. But this wasn't just a victory for Amanda's family. It was a game-changer for the investigation. Because, for the first time in years, they had a solid link. A piece of Amanda, her blood, had been found in Forest Park. And with that blood came the possibility of answers. Real answers about what had happened to her all those years ago. Now the question was, how had the shirt gotten there? The discovery of the shirt deepened the mystery. Why would Amanda's shirt end up in this park? What had happened between the time she was last seen and the moment her shirt was discarded? The next step was clear. The investigation had to go back to square one. They had DNA, but they needed more. They needed to find the person who had left this evidence behind. They needed to find the man in the gray jacket, the blurry figure seen walking with Amanda in the CCTV footage from Queensboro Plaza Station. But there was a catch. The DNA found on Amanda's shirt didn't just match her. It also contained traces of an unknown male. This was the twist that no one had anticipated. The blood on the shirt wasn't just Amanda's. It had been mixed with someone else's. Someone who had been in close contact with her. Someone who, at that moment, had become the prime suspect in her murder. The discovery of this new DNA evidence shifted the investigation into an entirely new direction. With this new lead in hand, the NYPD began scouring criminal databases, trying to match the DNA to any known offenders. But even with this breakthrough, the identity of the man remained a mystery. The police were faced with an unsettling question. Who was this man, and why had his DNA been found on Amanda's shirt? What did this new evidence mean for the investigation? How could they track down someone who, at this point, was just a shadow in the background of a blurry CCTV image? The path forward was murky. The shirt was a significant piece of the puzzle, but it raised more questions than it answered. The NYPD's investigation had entered a new phase, one that would require all the resources they could muster. The discovery of Amanda's shirt was no longer just a tragic reminder of what had happened to her. It was the key that would finally unlock the truth. And for the first time in years, the team felt a renewed sense of urgency. The man in the gray jacket, the shadow that had haunted this case for 16 long years, was about to be brought into the light. But they knew that in order to find him, they had to act fast. The evidence from the shirt had opened up a whole new world of possibilities. The NYPD was now on the hunt for a man they had never known, but whose DNA had left a permanent mark on the case. The investigation, which had stalled for over a decade, was now set to take a dramatic turn. The breakthrough discovery of Amanda's blood-stained shirt was just the beginning. The hunt for the man in the gray jacket was about to intensify, and everything was riding on the next steps. With the shirt in their hands and the mystery of the man in gray growing more urgent, the NYPD was ready to pursue every lead. But even as they pieced together the puzzle, Amanda's family waited in anguish. They had always held on to the hope that one day, the truth would be uncovered. Now, for the first time in years, that hope seemed within reach. But would they find the answers they had been desperately searching for? Would the man in gray finally be brought to justice? Or would this new evidence be yet another cruel twist in an already agonizing journey? Stay with me as we continue to uncover the shocking details of Amanda Pierce's case. The breakthrough in Forest Park was only the beginning. The next steps would reveal more about the man in gray, the chilling truth behind Amanda's disappearance, and how the relentless pursuit of justice finally uncovered the truth that had been hidden for so long. It took 16 long years for the truth to finally surface, but by 2020, the NYPD had a name: Michael Coleman. At first, the name may not have meant much to anyone, but to those in the know, it would send shockwaves through the entire community. For years, Coleman had been living in New York, seemingly blending into the fabric of the city. A quiet man, a plumber by trade, living in Brooklyn. No one could have ever suspected the dark secrets he was harboring. How was it possible that someone like him, a man with a history of violence and a past littered with arrests, had escaped the scrutiny of authorities for so long? How had he hidden in plain sight while the Pierce family mourned and searched for their missing daughter? The answer lay in the painstaking work of the NYPD, who, after years of dead ends and false leads, finally connected the dots. It wasn't just the DNA found on Amanda's shirt. No, this was about a series of small, seemingly insignificant clues that, when pieced together, revealed a pattern. A pattern of someone who had been lurking in the background for far too long, unnoticed and unchallenged. Michael Coleman's DNA had been found on Amanda's shirt, but that was just the beginning. Investigators soon found links to his past, his criminal history, his proximity to the scene, and his interactions with women who had crossed his path before. With the DNA match confirmed, the NYPD went into overdrive, gathering evidence, searching through old records, and piecing together the life of a man who had been living in the shadows. They uncovered a trail of arrests, incidents, and allegations stretching back years. It was as if Coleman had been walking a fine line, just on the edge of detection, always managing to escape the full force of justice. In February 2020, Michael Coleman was arrested in a manner that shocked everyone who knew him. The man who had once been nothing more than a name on a list, a blurry figure in the background of security footage, was now standing at the center of a storm that had been brewing for over 16 years. When the NYPD arrested him, they were not just capturing a man. They were capturing the embodiment of every question that had gone unanswered, every mystery that had been left unresolved. On the morning of his arrest, Coleman's face remained emotionless. His demeanor was cold, detached, as if he had been expecting this moment for some time. But for the rest of the world, this was the moment that would change everything. The man who had once walked freely, who had blended into the backdrop of the city's daily grind, was now exposed. His connection to Amanda Pierce's murder was undeniable, and the community, still reeling from the shock of the discovery, was about to learn the true extent of the horror he had hidden for so long. Michael Coleman had lived in Brooklyn for years, working as a plumber, fixing pipes and installing systems in homes across the city. He had been a fixture in the neighborhood, an everyday man who seemed harmless enough. His quiet, unassuming nature made him an unlikely suspect. And yet, as the investigation unfolded, the truth began to emerge, piece by piece, until it became impossible to ignore. The arrest was swift, coordinated, and methodical. The NYPD had spent months preparing for this moment, gathering enough evidence to ensure that Coleman could not slip through their fingers once again. He was taken into custody without incident, escorted by a team of detectives and officers who had worked tirelessly for over a decade to bring him to justice. But as he was led away in handcuffs, the real shock wasn't just the arrest itself. It was the revelation that this man, who had lived so close to the scene of the crime, had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. The news of his arrest spread like wildfire. The shock was palpable. How had a man like Coleman been able to walk among them for all those years, undetected? How had he been able to live his life without anyone suspecting that he was capable of such a horrific crime? The community was left to grapple with the chilling reality that a murderer had been living just a few miles away, blending into the everyday hustle and bustle of New York City. The fact that he had managed to evade justice for so long only deepened the sense of betrayal and fear that now gripped the city. For the Pierce family, the arrest was a bittersweet victory. On one hand, they finally had answers. After 16 long years of pain, uncertainty, and sleepless nights, they knew who had taken their daughter's life. But on the other hand, they were left to process the shock that someone who had been so close, who had lived in the same city, had been capable of such an unspeakable act. Imagine being in their shoes. All those years of hoping, of searching, of praying for closure. And then to learn that the man responsible for their daughter's death had been right there, living among them, living his life as if nothing had happened. The depth of the betrayal was almost too much to bear. As the news of Coleman's arrest spread, the community of Queens was rocked. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers were left to ask the same question. How could they have missed it? How could they have allowed someone like him to slip under the radar for so long? For 16 years, the city had been searching for the answers to a mystery that had haunted it. And now the answers were finally within reach. But the question remained, what had led Michael Coleman to commit such a brutal crime? What was the motive behind the murder of Amanda Pierce? And why had he waited so long to be caught? In the days following the arrest, reporters and journalists swarmed the area, eager to get the inside scoop on the man behind the crime. News outlets broadcasted the details of the case, and the story of Amanda Pierce, once a cold case, a forgotten tragedy, was thrust back into the public eye. The community that had once feared that Amanda's story would fade into obscurity was now united in the search for justice. But even as the investigation took a new turn, the questions continued to pile up. What had driven Michael Coleman to kill Amanda? Was it a crime of passion, a sudden outburst of violence, or was there something more? And how had he managed to conceal his involvement for so many years? As the NYPD prepared for the next steps in the investigation, the community continued to process the shock of it all. For those who had known Coleman, those who had seen him around the neighborhood, at the bar, fixing pipes in the building, this arrest was a wake-up call. It was a reminder that evil can hide in plain sight, that the most unassuming people can carry the darkest secrets. And for Amanda's family, it was the first step toward justice. But even as the police moved forward with their case, the question of why this happened still lingered, waiting to be answered. Stay with me as we continue to uncover the layers of this shocking story. The arrest of Michael Coleman was just the beginning, and the twists and turns of this case will leave you questioning how someone like him could have lived among us, unnoticed for so long. The search for justice is far from over, and the truth about what happened to Amanda Pierce is still unfolding. The trial of Michael Coleman was a moment the Pierce family had waited 16 years for. Every step, every word, every piece of evidence brought them closer to the truth they had longed to hear, but none of them could have prepared for the emotional weight of the courtroom. The case against Coleman was solid. His DNA had been found on Amanda's shirt, forensic experts had reconstructed his movements, and the evidence clearly pointed to him as the one who took Amanda's life. Yet, it was the courtroom itself, the place where justice would finally be served, that would test everyone involved in ways no one could have predicted. As the trial began, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The gallery was packed, reporters lined the back of the room, and the jury sat in silence, eyes fixed on the proceedings. Michael Coleman sat at the defendant's table, his face impassive, his eyes focused straight ahead. He showed no emotion, not even when the evidence began to unfold before the court. The prosecution laid out a damning case, piece by piece. The DNA, the evidence from Forest Park, the bloodstained shirt, the CCTV footage of Coleman with Amanda. But even with all this, there was still a palpable sense of disbelief in the room. How had this man lived freely for so many years? How had he hidden in plain sight? The defense, of course, did what they were paid to do: mount a defense. They tried to poke holes in the prosecution's case, questioning the integrity of the DNA sample, suggesting that it could have been contaminated over the years. They even tried to argue that Michael Coleman had been in a completely different part of the city that night. But none of it stuck. The evidence was overwhelming, and the facts were undeniable. As the prosecution presented each piece of evidence, Michael Coleman's fate seemed more and more sealed. But then there was a shift, the moment that no one saw coming, the emotional turning point of the trial. It wasn't just the physical evidence or the forensic analysis that would seal the case. It was the raw, painful testimony of the person who had suffered the most. Amanda's mother, Linda Pierce, took the stand. When Linda Pierce walked into the courtroom, the room fell into a hush. Every eye was on her, on the woman who had spent 16 years in agony, never knowing what happened to her daughter. Amanda's mother was a woman of grace and strength, but as she sat in the witness chair, it was clear that her composure was about to be tested like never before. The prosecutor led her through the questioning, but there were no prepared statements, no rehearsed lines. Linda spoke from her heart, recounting the moment she first realized something was wrong. She talked about that terrible night in 2003 when Amanda didn't come home, when the phone calls went unanswered, when the hours stretched on into the early morning, and the gnawing fear began to take root. With each word, the weight of Linda's grief became palpable. She described the pain of never knowing where her daughter was, the helplessness of waiting for a call that never came, the heartbreak of seeing her daughter's face on missing person flyers every day. Her voice cracked as she spoke about the 16 years of waiting for a sign, for closure, for justice. She spoke of the candlelight vigils, the unanswered questions, the quiet prayers that were whispered in the darkest moments. But the emotional weight of Linda's testimony didn't just resonate with the jury or the spectators in the courtroom. It reached Michael Coleman. For the first time in the entire trial, the man who had been so cold, so emotionless, showed a flicker of something. Guilt, maybe, or remorse. He shifted in his seat, his eyes darting away from Linda's gaze, as if he couldn't bear the weight of her words. And yet, the most chilling part was yet to come. Linda Pierce wasn't done. She wasn't finished with her message. As she spoke about Amanda's life, the hope she had for her daughter, and the unfulfilled dreams, Linda's eyes met the defendant's for the first time in the trial. And it was there, in that brief exchange of glances, that the true power of her testimony hit its mark. For the first time, Michael Coleman wasn't just a man accused of murder. He was the face of everything Linda had lost. She spoke directly to him. "You took my daughter from me," she said, her voice shaking but steady. "You stole her future, her chance to live. You took everything from us, and for 16 years, we've lived in the shadow of your actions. You thought you could hide, but you were wrong. You were wrong." The room was still. There was no sound, no movement, just the silence that followed Linda's words, echoing through the courtroom like a final blow. As Linda Pierce finished her testimony, the emotional impact was undeniable. The jury sat in silence, visibly affected by her words. Even the defense attorneys seemed stunned by the rawness of her grief. But the most chilling moment came when Linda spoke about the years of waiting, the years of not knowing. "We held on to hope," she said softly. "But hope without answers is just pain. For 16 years, I've waited for justice." It was at that moment that something changed in the courtroom. The case had shifted from a matter of facts and evidence to something far more personal. It was no longer just about Michael Coleman's actions. It was about the lives he had shattered, the people he had destroyed, and the pain he had caused. The prosecution rested its case shortly after Linda's testimony, and Michael Coleman's defense team tried to salvage what was left of his chances. They continued to argue that the DNA evidence was circumstantial, that it could have been planted or tampered with over the years. They tried to paint him as a victim of a flawed system, someone who had been wrongfully accused. But none of it held up. Coleman's own words in the interrogation room were a critical turning point. As the audio recording of his confession played in court, the room was filled with the haunting sound of Coleman's voice. "I didn't mean to kill her." Those words, spoken with such chilling indifference, reverberated through the courtroom, leaving no doubt in anyone's mind. The man in the gray jacket was no longer just a blurry figure from CCTV footage. He was a killer, and his silence was finally broken. The final twist came in the form of one last surprise witness. A neighbor of Michael Coleman's, who had lived near him in Brooklyn in 2003, came forward. He testified that on the night Amanda disappeared, he had seen Coleman return home late, disheveled, his clothes stained with what appeared to be dirt or blood. "I asked him what was wrong," the witness said, "and he just shrugged it off, said it was nothing." That was the final piece of the puzzle. The timeline was complete. Michael Coleman had no alibi for the night of Amanda's disappearance, and the physical evidence lined up with every part of the story. The jury deliberated for what felt like an eternity. They reviewed the evidence, the DNA match, the DNA samples from the beer can, the testimony, the confession. Finally, the verdict was in. Guilty. Second-degree murder. The room fell silent as the jury's decision was announced. The weight of 16 years of pain and uncertainty finally lifted, if only for a moment. The Pierce family sat together, hands clenched tightly, their faces etched with the grief of so many years, but also with a sense of relief. Their daughter had been stolen from them, but now, at long last, the man who took her life would face justice. And for Michael Coleman, the weight of his own actions finally caught up with him. He sat motionless as the verdict was read. His years of evading justice, his attempts to hide in plain sight, had come to an end. And as the courtroom erupted into a mix of emotions, relief, anger, and disbelief, Amanda Pierce's story finally found its conclusion. 16 years. 16 long years of searching, of waiting, of heartbreak. For the Pierce family, the moment they had so desperately hoped for had finally arrived. Michael Coleman, the man who had torn their family apart, was found guilty of second-degree murder. The truth, though delayed, had finally come to light. As the verdict was read aloud in the courtroom, there was no immediate celebration, no joyous outbursts. Instead, the room was filled with a heavy, solemn silence. The gravity of the moment settled over the Pierce family like a thick blanket. suffocating, and bittersweet. After all these years of searching for their daughter's killer, they now had the answer, but at what cost? For Amanda's mother, Linda, the verdict was like a weight lifted off her chest, but the joy of justice could never replace the daughter she had lost. The jury's decision didn't bring her back. No number of years behind bars for Michael Coleman would erase the emptiness in Linda's heart or the vacant chair at their dinner table. Amanda's father, too, struggled with mixed emotions. While relief washed over him that his daughter's killer would never harm another soul, the pain of the 16 years of anguish remained sharp. The courtroom had given them the truth, but the void left in their lives by Amanda's absence was immeasurable. How could a mother and father ever heal from the loss of their child? The verdict, while monumental, could never fill that void. The trial was over, but the real work for the Pierce family was just beginning. The emotional journey of rebuilding their lives would never truly end. As they left the courthouse that day, their eyes were red and swollen, their steps slow and heavy, but they carried a small glimmer of peace with them. The truth was no longer an unknown. Amanda's killer had been unmasked, and for the first time in 16 years, the questions that had haunted them for so long had been answered. Michael Coleman would never walk free again. His fate had been sealed, not just by the DNA evidence that linked him to Amanda's body, but by the emotional weight of the entire case. The cold, unfeeling man who had stalked Amanda that night, who had taken her life, was now behind bars where he belonged. The jury had spoken, and the truth was undeniable. But what of the community? Queens had lived with the shadow of Amanda's disappearance for 16 years. The memory of her smile, her light, had never truly faded. Residents had gathered year after year, lighting candles, sharing stories, and hoping for the day when justice would prevail. Amanda's story had been passed down through generations, whispered in the streets, remembered by all who had been affected by her disappearance. It was the story of a young woman who had vanished without a trace, but it was also the story of a community that had come together, bound by the desire to uncover the truth. And now, with Michael Coleman's conviction, the community could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The streets of Queens, which had once been filled with the whispers of fear and doubt, could now begin to heal. But for many, the journey was far from over. There would always be those who remembered Amanda Pierce, the bright young woman whose life had been stolen in a brutal act of violence. The emotional toll of this case extended far beyond the Pierce family. It had impacted everyone in Queens who had followed the case, everyone who had heard Amanda's story and wondered if justice would ever come. It reminded the city of the fragility of life, of how a single moment could change everything, and how the quest for justice, while painful, was worth every step. For Detective Laura Chen, who had pursued this case from the very beginning, the conviction was a personal victory, but it was also a reminder of the sacrifices made along the way. The years spent chasing leads, the moments of disappointment, and the endless hours of waiting. The pursuit of justice had been her life's work, and now, at long last, the case was closed. But the emotional weight of the journey had left its mark. No amount of closure could erase the pain of Amanda's loss, or the faces of the family who had suffered in silence for so many years. And yet, as the trial concluded, as the gavel fell and Michael Coleman's fate was sealed, there was a sense of peace that settled over the Pierce family. Amanda's story was no longer just one of a missing person, but of a woman who had been found, a woman who had been remembered. Her legacy lived on, not just in the memory of her family, but in the hearts of everyone who had followed her story and fought for her justice. Though Amanda's life was cut short, her spirit remained alive in the people who had never forgotten her. The community that had once been divided by the uncertainty of her disappearance was now united in the knowledge that justice had prevailed. And for the Pierce family, as they buried their daughter, they knew that Amanda's story would never be forgotten. Her name would forever be a symbol of the fight for truth, and her memory would live on in the hearts of those who had been touched by her tragic fate. Justice had come at last, but it had come at a great cost. It was a bittersweet victory, one that would never undo the years of pain and loss, but it was a victory nonetheless. And for Amanda, it was the final chapter in a life cut far too short. Her story had been told, her killer had been caught, and the city of Queens could finally begin to heal. But the memory of Amanda Pierce, the young woman with a bright smile and the dreams of a future that would never be, would never fade. She would always be remembered. Thank you so much for sticking with us through Amanda's heartbreaking journey. If you've been moved by her story and the relentless pursuit of justice, it's time to show your support. These stories are not easy to produce and they take a lot of time and effort. If you believe that persistence, truth, and science can bring the truth to light, like this video. Subscribe to this channel so you can be part of the ongoing fight for justice. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about Amanda's journey. Someone who still believes that the truth will always find its way. And please, turn on that notification bell so you're the first to know when I bring you another shocking story. I promise, you won't want to miss it. It's hard to wrap your mind around the passage of time, especially when it comes to a crime so haunting that it lingers in the minds of many, even after years have gone by. 16 years. For the family, that's not just a number. It's a lifetime of searching, praying, and hoping for a truth they never thought would come. But sometimes, in the midst of silence and unanswered questions, someone, comes along and turns the wheel of justice. For the Pierce family, that something came in 2019, when a broken piece of fabric, long discarded, brought them closer to their daughter's killer than they had ever imagined. I can only imagine what it must have felt like to be Amanda Pierce's mother. To lose your child in the most inexplicable way, to have them vanish without a trace in the middle of a New York summer night. You hope for answers, and you hold on to the smallest pieces of hope. That one phone call, the sight of that one blurry security footage, maybe just one small lead that might lead you to the person responsible for taking your daughter. Every day feels like an eternity. It's a constant, unrelenting ache. And yet, through it all, her family never gave up. They lit candles every year, praying for closure, for justice, for the truth to finally be revealed. And then came the moment that changed everything. That discovery, buried in the woods of Forest Park, would be the one that cracked open this case. A shirt, stained with blood. Amanda's shirt. A piece of evidence, a small but critical clue that, after all these years, would finally point to the truth. It wasn't just a tattered piece of fabric. It was the key to unlock 16 years of unanswered questions. The key to solving the mystery that had plagued New York City for over a decade. But here's the thing about time. It's both a gift and a curse. While it allows for healing, it also allows the criminals to fade into the shadows, to live their lives while the victim's families suffer. The man in gray, the shadowy figure seen with Amanda just hours before she vanished, was a name that had haunted detectives for years. Who was he? What was his connection to Amanda? Was he just a stranger? Or was there something more? The blurry footage that night offered little more than a glimpse into the uncertainty of it all. The face wasn't clear. But the suspicion, the mystery, and the fear that it could be someone she knew, someone close to her, lingered. That question, who was he? Echoed in the halls of police precincts for years. It seemed like a cruel joke. The harder the investigators worked, the less they found. 4 years, every piece of evidence led to a dead end. But in the absence of physical evidence, there was always the faint flicker of hope that one day, the truth would come to light. And then, after all that time, after so many years of waiting, the breakthrough came in the form of science. Of technology that had advanced beyond what was possible in 2003. DNA analysis, forensic testing, and, eventually, genetic genealogy would bring to light a name that the world had never considered. Michael Coleman. Here's the twist. He wasn't a stranger. Not at all. He was someone who had been living right under the nose of the entire city. Someone who had been hiding in plain sight. A 44-year-old plumber with a history of violence, harassment, and shady dealings. He was a man whose path had crossed with Amanda's long before she had ever been taken. A man who had been lurking in the shadows of Queens, stalking her from a distance, waiting for the moment when he would act. And when he did, when he took her from the crowded station that night, he thought he'd gotten away with it. He thought he could hide forever. But what he didn't know was that time was on the side of truth. Time would catch up with him, and so would the advancements in forensic science. To be arrested in 2020 for something you did in 2003, it must feel like being dragged from a past you thought was long gone. But the truth, as they say, never stays buried. And Michael Coleman's truth was finally uncovered. He had lived a life of secrecy, but that was all over now. His arrest, his face captured in the police van as he was escorted out, would be the moment that ended the silence. The community, stunned by the news, couldn't fathom how someone like him had lived among them for so long. A man who had been part of the fabric of Queens, with a history of getting away with his actions. How many times had he slipped through the cracks? How many people had been left in the dark because of his ability to hide behind his anonymity? He had been living a double life. But in the end, it wasn't enough. The arrest didn't just mean that Michael Coleman would finally face justice. It meant that Amanda's story, her life, would be heard. It meant that the search, the years of wondering, the void left behind, could finally be filled with a sense of closure, a sense of peace, no matter how bitter it might taste. For her family, justice couldn't undo the years of heartache. It couldn't replace their daughter. But it could offer them something that they had been denied for far too long: the truth, the confirmation of what had happened to their beloved Amanda. And let's talk about Amanda's mother for a moment. When Linda Pierce took the stand in the courtroom, the emotional weight of it all became unbearable. The woman who had been through it all, who had suffered in silence, who had lived with the unknown for so long, she finally spoke the words that would resonate through the courtroom. The pain of losing a child is something no parent should ever experience. It's a loss that cuts deeper than anything else, and Linda had carried that burden for 16 long years. But now, as she sat there, facing the man who had taken her daughter, she could finally say, "This is it. This is the truth." As the trial progressed, the pieces of the puzzle slowly came together. The DNA, the forensics, the confession, each detail stacked on top of the other, creating an unbreakable case. But it wasn't just the facts that made this trial so moving. It was the emotional power behind it. For Linda Pierce, every word spoken in that courtroom was an excruciating reminder of everything she had lost. But at the same time, it was a reminder of how far she had come, how much she had endured, and how she had never given up hope. Her courage, her strength, her refusal to let Amanda's memory fade, those were the true marks of resilience. By the time the verdict came down, there was no doubt in anyone's mind. Michael Coleman had done what he had done. And now he would pay for it. Second-degree murder. A lifetime behind bars. But even with the conviction, the pain would never go away for the Pierce family. There was no amount of justice that could undo the years of torment they had suffered. But at least now, they could rest knowing that Amanda's killer would never walk free again. In the end, Amanda's case is a reminder of the power of persistence. It's a story about not giving up when the odds are stacked against you, about never losing hope, even in the face of overwhelming pain and frustration. It's a story of science, of justice, of truth. And it's a story of a mother who never stopped fighting for her daughter, no matter how long it took. After all, the truth has a way of coming to light. And when it does, it doesn't just reveal the past, it gives us the closure we so desperately need. Thank you for watching Amanda's story unfold. If you believe that justice can be delayed but never denied, hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who needs to know that persistence, truth, and science will eventually reveal the truth. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you'll always be the first to know when a new case is solved. See you in the next chilling story, where justice never sleeps.